Hello and welcome to the Gothic Unicorn. This time I'm going to use matchsticks, printer paper and recycled food packaging, and I'm going to make a plant stand complete with a potted plant. Obviously there'll be a few other things that I'm going to throw in as I go along, but these are my three main materials this week. To make my plant stand, I'm going to use craft matchsticks. I picked up a load of these for a really good price, and to be fair, I don't use them very often. So I was trying to think how I could use them, and I came up with this. Now, I'm planning to make a plant stand, and I want to do it so that it's sort of traditional coffin-y shape. And I'm thinking that I'm going to have something that starts off sort of this kind of shape. That's very rough, as you can tell, and I think I might put another shelf in the middle there. Shelves are always useful, especially in the doll's house, where you can put little oddments in there to make a scene look fuller. I know it's very basic, but you get the kind of idea. And I'll be making two shapes like this for the front and the back, and then I will be putting some pieces to join them and also making the shelves. I've begun by sticking matchsticks together to make my shelves. I've done that by sticking 8 of them together. Yeah, I just checked. I don't know how many times I've counted them. I glued them. I know there's 8, but I have just checked that there was 8. And I've cut a second set of matchsticks down to make my top and bottom. Now that is pretty much square. So I've checked the width of the 8 matchsticks, and then I cut it to size for that. This one I'm not sure what size I'm going for yet. I'm still playing about with it, but those are my shelves. At this point I should be showing you how I put together my coffin shaped plant stand. But there was a problem. There was actually a big problem. I drew it out, I used my matchsticks for sizing, and I figured it all out, and I figured out the angles, and I cut the matchsticks. And I went to stick them together and it didn't work. I could not get them into the shape that I wanted. So there was some cursing and a little bit of complete and utter dismay. And I decided that I got to look at this a different way. Now, because I still wanted to make this piece, and because the backstory for it is that it was made by a younger member of the family, I decided I would approach it in a different way. And this is what I'm going to explain now. So basically, I made this in a very unorthodox manner. I took my matchstick as it came out of the packet with flat ends, and I glued 4 of them to the underneath of what would become my middle shelf. Now you're thinking, why did you do that? Wouldn't they all be sticking straight up? Well, they were sticking straight up like that. I then applied a good glob of glue to each corner of what would become my bottom shelf, and I attached it. And I held it until the glue set. This angle is done by nothing more than me holding things in place and hoping that they would dry. And then I repeated the same process with the top piece. Simple as that. I'm afraid it's not very clever. It is not the wonderful "this is how you do it" tutorial that I planned. But it works. I've got the shape that I want, and now I can move on. I have not yet decided what finish I want for the plant stand. So I'm going to move on to making the pot, and I've just given this a coat of black craft paint, which will act as the base coat for whatever I do as a finishing coat. To make my plant pot, I'm using recycled food packaging, just a cardboard box, cereal, whatever comes in, and perfect material for this. Now, I have got 2 punched out circles. These are 5/8 of an inch, and I have got a strip that is a 1/2 an inch deep. The length of the strip doesn't matter. You just want a good length because it's got to go all the way around your pot. I've also covered the printed side with some copier paper for no other reason than it's far easier to disguise the copier paper later on than the printed pieces of the box. Now I'm going to start by gluing these 2 pieces, the 2 circles together, and I am just going to get a little bit of glue onto one of them, and I'm going to put the other one on top. Now I'm going to let those dry together, and then I'm going to attach the sides of the pot. To begin, I like to bend the card a little bit, not too tightly because I'll do that later when I'm actually gluing it, but enough that it starts to curve a bit, and then it makes it a bit easier when I'm trying to glue it. Now I take my base that's now glued nice and firmly together, and I apply a little bit of glue to one point on the edge. And then I'm going to take my cardboard strip, and I'm going to put the 2 together. Now I've let my glue sit on the little bit of card here for a while because it makes it tackier, and when it's tackier it grips quicker. Now I'm not going to rush to glue this. I will do this in little increments going round, letting it dry as I go. This is the key, because otherwise if you try and do it all at once it's just going to end up in a right mess. Now that my little cardboard pot is glued together and dry, I want to add a little decorative detail. Now I could at this point take some string, wrap it around and turn it into a basket, but I don't want a basket. I want to make it a little bit more textured looking, and I've been inspired this week to try using some sequins, and I am going to stick these and a little bit of the string around the pot to give it the basis for some texture. And I'm sorry if you can hear anything weird in the background. They're collecting the trash outside and it doesn't sound like their truck is very healthy. I did 2 rings of twine, one at the top and one at the bottom. Then I've added the sequins. Now all this is actually going to be covered with some paint, and first off I'm going to put a little bit of glue over the top of the sequins just to make sure that they stay in place, and then I'm going to give it a base coat of black craft paint. Now that the pot has been painted in the black, you can see that the sequins have sort of blended in. There's still a bit of the texture of them visible, and there's still some texture from the string visible, but it's looking far more like a cohesive whole. Now I've also painted just inside the top. This is so that if I don't quite fill it to the top, it won't look so obvious. For a top coat, I've decided to go with a metallic copper colour, which I've got here on my palette. and I'm just going to apply a thin coat, not exactly a dry brush, but a very rough brush, because I want it to leave some of the black showing. I'm going to start with the bottom, which will get the better coverage, and then I will work around the entire piece, painting it with this beautiful copper coloured paint. Now this is not a craft paint, this is thicker than that. It's actually a amateur artist paint, a cheap artist paint. It just works really, really well for getting quite a good metallic effect on my miniatures. And here is my finished pot. As you can see, the copper accentuates the pattern that I put on there, and it gives it that sort of aged look without me having to do much in the way of distressing. It was really simple, and as I say, it's not so much dry brushing as not very good brushing. Now, every plant pot needs a plant, and inspired in part by a poem that I've liked for a good many years, I'm going to attempt to make a pot of basil. Now the poem is Isabella by John Keats, and in that poem Isabella keeps the head of her murdered lover in a pot of basil. I'm not putting a head in this pot, although with the house that this is going in, it's always possible that there could be a skull inside there. Now what I've done is I've started with some air dry clay, which I've pushed into the pot to fill it. Now this will shrink back a little bit as it dries, which isn't a problem because I'm going to paint it, and I'm going to add some tea leaves with glue to make a sort of soil effect on the top in the end. But I've also put in some old holes at this stage, just poked in with some thicker wire than I'm going to use for the plant, just so that I've got somewhere to stick the stems of the plant once I get that far. The air dry clay is now dry in my pot, and I've put a quick coat of dark brown paint on it, and I'm going to add some glue and some tea. Yeah, that's what it is, it's tea. You can use coffee grounds, but we're tea drinkers in this house, so tea it is. And all I'm going to do with the glue is put a good coat around the holes that I put into the air dry clay in the first place. And the great thing about this is this bottle is I can use the nozzle to spread it. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch the tea over the glued areas. Until all the white disappears. Flick it off and add a bit more. Now I will go back and just make sure that all the holes for my wires are free, but again that needs to be left to dry. To make my plant, I'm going to be using copy paper, just ordinary paper like you'd put through your printer. This happens to be a piece that I've cut something off after I've printed it out. I keep all these pieces and they're great for doing this sort of thing. I'm also going to use some green beading wire, a alcohol marker. You can use any kind of marker, paint, whatever you want. I use these because, to be fair, it soaks through the paper that I use and I only have to colour one side. And I'm also using a punch that I just happened to own anyway. Now I've got one punched here. It's not exactly basil, And I'm sure, you know, there are people there that will be looking at this and thinking, oh, well, you could do it better by doing this and doing this. Yes, I could. But I've got this, and this is what I'm going to use. And I'm going to do a really, really sort of simple way of doing a passable plant. I've started by punching out quite a few of my leaves, probably more than I need, I don't know yet. And I've also got out this sheet. This, which you may have seen appearing and disappearing through the video, is a reusable oven liner. This is just a cheap one. It was picked up from a pound shop, but it is really, really good for putting things on when the glue's wet, when the paint's wet, and for it not sticking. And I found it again recently, and so I've been using it. But it's really good for this, because what it means is I can get my pen and I can colour on it, and then I can wipe up afterwards. And I'm using a cocktail stick here because it's smaller than my fingers. What it means is I can go over all the leaves of my little sprig and turn it green. And then if I turn it over, you can see that it is pretty much green on the other side as well. Needs a little bit of touching up on that one corner, but there we have my first sprig of basil. I'm starting my stem of basil, or basil if you prefer that pronunciation, with a piece of wire that is around about 1 inch long. I am going to dip the end of it into some glue that I've got on this bit of card here, and then I'm going to hold it with my pliers. I could probably do with my tweezers as well, but I'm going to try and do it without. Now I'm starting off with 2 leaves that I've cut off the top of my pieces, because basil grows its leaves in pairs, most definitely. And so I want, certainly at the top of my main piece, if I can ever pick this piece up, a pair of leaves. I'll then stick the other pieces on a little more randomly, to be fair. But I think for the top one, to be a pair would be quite good. And I've got a little tiny, if you can see that, I've got this in focus, a bit of stem left on there, which is what I'm sticking into the glue. And as you can see, I'm left with a pair of leaves. Now I'm going to stick this into my handy eraser, which I always use for sticking wires into, and then I will let that dry for a while before I start adding some of these down the stem to make my first stalk. Yeah, stalk's probably the right word. Stalk or stem of basil to go in my pot. Now I've put together a number of stems for my plant, and the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a small amount of matte Mod Podge, because I want a little bit of a sheen. Now I know matte Mod Podge might sound, you know, well, if you want to shine, why aren't you using the gloss? Matte actually dries slightly shiny, but not so shiny that it's in your face. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go around these and paint the leaves, just the top sides, the thin coat. Hopefully I'm doing this on camera, and then I can put the plant together. Now what I've done before I put my plant together, I have just put a little bit of matte Mod Podge on top of the tea leaves, just to make sure that they stay in place. It isn't quite dry yet, but that isn't a problem. Now I'll take first off, the piece that I've decided is going to be my centre piece of my plant. I use the pliers to hold it, and I'm going to dip the end into some glue before inserting it. See, quite quickly I've got a very full pot of basil. It might not be botanically correct as basil, but it is basil enough for my doll's house. And here we have my finished coffin plant stand and pot of basil. It might not have turned out how I intended when I started filming this video, but I'm really pleased with the piece. As you can see, I painted the stand to go with the pot, just added a little bit of the copper paint over the top of the black, and I think it looks very effective, and I think it will fit in nicely in my doll's house. If you've enjoyed what you see, please like my video, subscribe for more, and maybe even tick that notification bell if that's what you feel like doing. But for now, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.